I sat there in the courtroom, my hands folded over the worn photo of my daughter, its edges frayed from years of holding on. Across from me, he adjusted his tie like he hadn't buried her 6 months ago. Like none of this mattered. He never wanted to stay with her, he told the judge, his voice smooth, practiced. Her, as if I didn't have a name. As if the boy who curled into my lap every night didn't cry out grandma in his sleep. They called it a custody hearing, but it felt more like a funeral. Again. Wait. Before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The house was too quiet after the last casserole was dropped off. Carla moved through the stillness like a ghost, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding the broken pieces in. Upstairs, Eli's door creaked open just wide enough for his voice to carry. "Can I stay with you tonight?" he asked, soft as a breath. She turned from the hallway, blinking back a sting in her eyes. "Of course, baby." She tucked him into her bed that night, her arms folding around his small frame. He smelled faintly of dryer sheets and the vanilla shampoo his mother always used. He didn't cry. He just clutched the stuffed dinosaur Megan had bought him the week before the accident and whispered into Carla's chest, "I want to stay with you forever." Carla's throat clenched. She kissed the top of his head, but said nothing. At the funeral, Brian hadn't spoken a word to her. Not even a nod. He stood like a statue beside the casket, stone-faced, sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't turned her way once. When people offered condolences, he accepted them with a cold, efficient nod, as if filing them away. He didn't cry. He didn't touch Eli. When it was over, he disappeared before the last handful of dirt hit the lid. 3 days later, Carla opened her front door to find Brian standing on the porch in a black jacket, his jaw clenched, eyes flat. "I'll be back for him next week," he said, skipping hello entirely. Carla blinked, caught off guard. "Brian. He's still processing. He hasn't even gone back to school." "He needs routine," Brian said. "Staying here delays that." "He's not a checklist, Brian. He's grieving." His mouth tightened. "And so am I. He's my son." Carla stepped forward, lowering her voice so Eli, somewhere inside, wouldn't hear. "You haven't called. You didn't say a word to him at the funeral. That was not the time. Then when is?" Her voice cracked despite her. Brian's eyes flicked toward the street. "I'll be back Sunday," he said, already turning. "Pack his things." He left without another word. That night, Carla lay wide awake beside Eli. His little body curled instinctively toward hers in sleep, hand still gripping that dinosaur like it was a lifeline. She watched the ceiling, counting the cracks in the paint. Her chest ached, the kind that didn't throb, just pulsed like a bruise you couldn't find with your hands. She had never asked for this. Never expected to raise someone else's child, especially not like this, in the aftermath of metal and fire and finality. But she'd promised Megan years ago, when Megan had laughed over wine and said, "If anything ever happens to me, you're the only one I trust." It had been a joke then, a sisterly nudge. But now Megan was gone, and her son was in Carla's arms, and Brian was coming back in 4 days to take him away. Carla didn't cry. Instead, she reached carefully across the bed, picked up her phone, and opened her browser. Legal Aid Custody Hotline, Florida. She found one, tapped the number. It rang, and rang. A voice finally answered. "Legal Access Line, this is Danielle speaking." Carla's voice came out hoarse. "Hi, I need to ask about emergency guardianship. There's a little boy. His mom died. His father wants to take him, but—" Her voice caught. "But I don't think he's safe there." There was a long pause. "Okay," Danielle said gently. "Let's take this one step at a time." Across town, Brian stood alone in his garage. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. On the table beside him sat a sealed manila envelope. Megan's will. He hadn't opened it yet. But tomorrow, he would. And everything would change. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold coffee. Carla sat at the long oak table, her hands folded in her lap, back ramrod straight. Across from her, Brian leaned back in his chair like he had nothing to lose. A silver pen tapped restlessly against his thigh. Between them sat Julie, the court-appointed guardian ad litem, her clipboard resting on her knees, her expression unreadable. The room was too quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights a dull buzz over the tension in the air. Brian cleared his throat. She manipulated him. Julie looked up. I'm sorry? He nodded toward Carla, his voice smoother now. Eli was vulnerable. Megan had just died. Carla inserted herself, took advantage of that moment to wedge herself between a grieving father and his son. Carla's lips parted in disbelief, but she didn't speak. Not yet. I didn't even get to say goodbye before she moved him in. Had him calling her Mama Carla. His voice cracked, but the tears didn't come. Julie scribbled something. Her eyes never left him. Do you believe Eli's in danger staying with Carla? I believe he's confused, and grief makes people latch on to whoever gives them comfort. Brian leaned forward now, finally facing Carla. But that doesn't mean it's right. Carla stayed still, shoulders locked tight. She didn't trust her voice, so she waited. Let the silence work harder than her words. Julie finally turned to her. Ms. Garrison, do you have anything you want to say? Carla's hands clenched, then released. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn, soft-eared bunny. The toy looked fragile in her hands, like it would fall apart if squeezed too hard. My daughter used to hold this when she was scared, Carla said quietly, her voice steady now. After the accident, Eli found it in the closet. He started sleeping with it. I didn't offer it. He just found it. Julie watched her carefully. And you believe he's safer with you? I believe he feels safer with me. That's not the same thing as winning custody. I know that. She looked over at Brian, her voice low. But I've seen how Eli flinches when the phone rings, how he crawls into my bed at night without a sound. He doesn't cry. He just clings. Brian scoffed. You're painting me like a monster. Carla didn't respond. She didn't need to. Julie closed her notebook and stood. I'd like to speak with Eli privately. The observation room was small, with soft lighting and a shelf of forgotten toys in the corner. Eli sat on a low couch, his knees swinging. Julie crouched beside him, offering a piece of paper and some crayons. You don't have to answer anything, okay? She said. But if you want to tell me something without words, you can draw it. Eli nodded, wide-eyed. Julie stepped back. Let him be. Minutes passed, the quiet filled with the faint scrape of crayon on paper. Then he held it up. A swing set, 2 worn ropes, a plank of wood between them. Behind it, a patch of grass with a dog he'd named Biscuit drawn in wobbly brown lines. Carla's backyard. Julie crouched again. What's this? He smiled. That's where I feel like I can breathe. Julie froze for a second, then nodded, gently taking the paper from him. Later that afternoon, Carla stood in the hallway, arms crossed, the bunny still in her hand like a relic. Julie stepped out from the room, her face neutral, clipboard hugged to her chest. Well? Carla asked, barely above a whisper. I'm not making a recommendation today, Julie said. Carla felt her stomach drop. What? Why? Julie looked at her evenly. Because I don't just report on comfort, I report on stability, on legal precedent, on long-term outcomes. Carla blinked, holding in the wave threatening to crest. Julie's tone softened, almost imperceptibly. Eli's drawing was meaningful. But it's not everything. I need more time. She turned to go. Carla stared down at the bunny, its threadbare ear folded like a question mark in her palm. That night, Brian finally opened the will. Inside, one line was circled in Megan's handwriting. In the event of my death, I do not want Brian Pearson to have sole custody. And beneath it, in the margins, scribbled faintly in ink, ask Carla. She knows why. Brian's breath caught. He stood there, frozen, because he did know why. The receptionist at Dr. Anders's pediatric clinic offered Carla a sympathetic smile as she handed over the manila folder. These are everything we have on Ava. I'm sorry for your loss, Ms. Garrison. Carla nodded, lips pressed thin, eyes hollow but steady. Thank you. She waited until she was outside, parked beneath the faded shadow of a dying magnolia tree, before opening it. Her fingers moved through the charts quickly, weight updates, allergy notes, appointment reminders. Then a handwritten note in the corner margin caught her eye. Frequent stomach aches, patient attributes to stress at home. Mother quietly noted ongoing emotional strain from unresolved parental conflict. Recommend counseling. Declined by father. Carla exhaled slowly, the page trembling slightly in her grip. Ava had never said those words aloud. But here they were, scribbled in ink, catalogued like a footnote in a life already ended. The next stop was Tasha's house, a single-story ranch with a chipped birdhouse and a wreath that hadn't been changed since 4th of July. Tasha answered in sweatpants and a paint-smeared tank top. She didn't smile. She just stepped aside and let Carla in. They sat in the kitchen, two mismatched mugs between them, steam curling lazily into the silence. I found something, Carla said, laying the doctor's note on the table. Tasha read it once, twice. Her jaw tightened. Did you ever see him yell? Carla asked, voice calm, almost too calm. Tasha looked away. Tash. She exhaled. Yeah. Once, maybe twice. Carla tilted her head. Be honest. Tasha swallowed. Last year, Ava came over for dinner. Brian called while we were plating food. I didn't hear the words, just her reaction. She cried in my kitchen, said she forgot to bring home something important, and it was her fault again. She paused. I didn't press. I should have. You couldn't have known, Carla whispered. I did know, Tasha said, her voice cracking. I just didn't want it to be true. Back at home, Carla sealed the doctor's notes and Tasha's written statement inside a white envelope, her hands steady, almost mechanical. She pressed the flap closed, scribbled Clint in block letters, and slipped it into her bag. Clint would know what to do. If Brian wanted a war, Carla wouldn't raise her voice. She'd raise the facts. That night, Eli screamed in his sleep. It wasn't loud, more of a strangled whimper that peeled Carla from her bed like a reflex. She found him tangled in his sheets, breathing fast, small fists curled tight against his chest. Hey, hey, she murmured, crouching beside the bed. You're okay, I'm here. He didn't wake, not fully, just reached blindly for her, clung to her wrist like it was the only rope keeping him from drowning. She slipped into bed beside him, held him close, let his heartbeat slow against hers. I got you, she whispered, brushing hair from his damp forehead. You're safe. He didn't say anything, but he didn't let go. The next morning, Clint opened the envelope. His brows lifted as he read, page by page. When he looked up, something colder had settled in his expression. This changes things, he said. Carla just nodded. I'm filing for emergency guardianship, he said. And I'm going to subpoena Dr. Anders. You sure you want to go all the way with this? Carla didn't hesitate. He's not going back to that house. Meanwhile, across town, Brian stood in his garage again. Same cigarette, same silence. Only this time, the photo Megan had framed for their wedding sat shattered at his feet. He didn't bend to pick it up. He just stared at it. Then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a bottle of pills. And swallowed 3. The knock came just after sunset, loud, deliberate, no patience in it. Carla froze at the sink, dishwater dripping from her hands. Outside, red and blue lights flickered faintly across her front lawn. Not flashing, not urgent, just present. She dried her hands slowly and walked to the door. Brian stood on the porch. A uniformed deputy loomed just behind him, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a folded sheet of paper. Brian's mouth was a thin slash. His eyes were wild, sleepless. "He's coming with me. Tonight." Carla didn't blink. "You brought a sheriff to take a grieving child out of bed?" Brian stepped forward. "There's a custody order." Carla held up a single sheet, freshly printed, court-stamped. "It was denied this morning. Emergency guardianship granted. Judge Ryder signed off at 8:17 a.m. The deputy took the paper from her hands, scanned it carefully. "She's telling the truth," he muttered. He turned slightly toward Brian, less sympathetic now. "You'll need to go through family court. We can't enforce anything tonight." Brian's face didn't change, but his hands curled into fists. "You lied," he whispered to Carla. "You twisted everything. Megan would never—" "She did," Carla said quietly. "She wrote it down." A muscle jumped in Brian's jaw. "I suggest you leave," the deputy said, more firmly now. "We're done here." Brian didn't move at first. Then he laughed, just once. A bitter, disbelieving sound that didn't reach his eyes. He turned on his heel and walked down the steps, jaw clenched, boots striking the concrete hard. Carla watched as he got into his truck, gripped the wheel like he wanted to snap it, then peeled away without another word. The sheriff tipped his hat to her. "We'll file a report." Carla nodded. "Thank you." The door closed with a soft click. Upstairs, Eli peeked through the bedroom curtains. He didn't say anything, didn't move. Just stared down at the tire tracks Brian's truck had carved into the gravel. His tiny shoulders trembled. Carla stepped behind him and laid a hand on his back. "He's gone." Eli's voice barely registered. "Was he mad?" Carla knelt beside him. "Maybe. But that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, slowly, but didn't look away. That night, Carla sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers wrapped around a small silver pocket knife. It had been her father's. He used to carry it on fishing trips, insisting it was just in case. It had sat in a drawer for years, buried beneath loose batteries and old receipts. Tonight, she slid it into her nightstand without ceremony, not out of paranoia, out of instinct. Her house was hers, and no one was going to walk through that door again without her say-so. The next morning, Clint sat across from her at the diner they always used for meetings they didn't want documented. "She held the line, but it's temporary," he said, sipping his coffee. "Emergency guardianship isn't permanent." Carla nodded. "I know." "I filed for supervised visitation," he added, sliding a folder across the table. "Based on the testimony, the medical notes, and Megan's will, we have a solid shot." Carla opened the folder. Inside, printouts of Ava's records, photos of the swing set, a copy of Megan's handwritten margin note. Clint leaned in. "But if he shows up again, unannounced, or worse, you call me." Then the sheriff. She didn't flinch. "I will." Clint narrowed his eyes. "Carla, don't try to handle him alone." She didn't answer, but her hand slid unconsciously across her purse, where the photo of Ava still lived, folded like a shield. That evening, Brian sat alone in his darkened truck across from Carla's house. The engine idled. The radio crackled low with static. In his lap, a bottle of lighter fluid. Beside him, on the seat, Megan's wedding dress, balled up tight like a rag. He stared at the porch light. and didn't move. Yet. Julie adjusted the recorder on the coffee table and gave Tasha a slow nod. "I know it's uncomfortable," she said, voice low. "But we're looking for patterns, not perfection." Tasha's hands curled around her mug. "I didn't want to get in the middle, I really didn't." Julie didn't press. Silence had a way of pulling the truth forward. Tasha swallowed. "It wasn't all the time. But there were moments. I'd hear Ava's voice get tight when he called, like she was bracing for something. And after the call? Sometimes she wouldn't talk for the rest of the night." Julie's pen moved across the page in calm, precise strokes. "One time," Tasha continued, "Eli was running through our backyard. Brian stormed over and grabbed him by the arm so hard I thought it would leave a bruise. Said something about rules being rules. The kid didn't even say anything. He just looked terrified." Julie paused her writing. "Did you ever witness yelling inside their house?" Tasha nodded slowly. "Walls are thin on our block. I'd hear the front door slam. Furniture shift. Her crying." His voice raised. "It got to the point I'd turn up the TV just so I wouldn't have to hear it." Julie clicked the recorder off. "Thank you." Tasha looked away. "I should have said something sooner." Julie didn't answer, but her expression had changed. Later that week, Julie walked the block. Quiet cul-de-sac. Trimmed hedges. The kind of place where secrets lived in plain sight. Mrs. Ingram from 2 doors down leaned on her cane and spoke without hesitation. "That man never looked at that boy like a father should. Always barking at him in the driveway. Made him flinch like a dog that had been hit." Julie raised an eyebrow. "Did you report any of this?" The old woman's eyes narrowed. "And to who? I figured someone would eventually. Guess that someone's you now." Julie made another note. Back at Carla's, the garden buzzed with late summer bees. Tomatoes ripened on the vine. Eli crouched beside a patch of marigolds, dirt under his fingernails, humming to himself without realizing it. Julie watched from the patio. No supervision, no staged conversation. Just a boy. Whole in a moment. "Biscuit," Eli called, and the shaggy mutt bounded across the lawn to collapse beside him. Julie turned to Carla. "He seems grounded here." Carla didn't respond, just kept weeding the planters. Julie didn't mind the silence. She had enough noise in her notes. The next day, Brian sat stiffly in the visitation room. Sterile walls, plastic chairs, a two-way mirror. Carla wasn't present, per court order, but Julie stood silently in the corner with her clipboard. Eli entered slowly, his body smaller than usual, shoulders drawn up like armor. He sat across from Brian, folding his hands neatly on the table like he was in school. Brian leaned forward. "Hey, bud, I missed you." Eli said nothing. "I brought your train set. Thought we could play." Still silence. Brian reached into the bag beside him and slid the engine across the table. Eli's eyes flicked to it, then to the mirror, then to the floor. Julie wrote something down. Brian forced a chuckle. "You're not mad at me, are you? Your aunt's just confused, that's all. She thinks she's doing the right thing." "I don't want to talk," Eli said softly, cutting him off. Brian blinked. Julie noted it. Emotional withdrawal, lack of eye contact, tension. She looked at the boy sitting inches from his biological father. He might as well have been miles away. That night, Julie sat in her car outside Carla's house, the engine off. She flipped through her notes again. Tasha, the neighbors, the body language, the garden, the silence. Her neutral tone, the one she was trained to maintain, began to crack around the edges. She clicked her recorder back on. "Field observation, September 12th, she said into the mic. Subject, Eli Pearson. Notation, sustained avoidance of biological father. demonstrated ease and verbal engagement in guardian's care, reports of escalated emotional episodes and indirect signs of domestic distress confirmed by multiple witnesses. She paused, requesting psychological assessment, and recommending restriction of unsupervised visitation privileges pending full custody hearing. She stopped the recording, and for the first time since she'd taken the case, she locked her doors before leaving. Clint adjusted his tie as he leaned over the courthouse service window. "We're requesting all closed or open CPS reports related to Brian Pearson. Full history. No redactions unless sealed by the court." The clerk behind the plexiglass screen blinked. She looked barely 23, her nails chipped, a half-eaten muffin on her desk. "Give me a minute." She disappeared into the back. Clint exhaled slowly and checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Carla. He didn't answer them, not until he had something to give her. 10 minutes passed, then the clerk returned, not with a folder, but a box. Plain, heavy, taped twice over. "We just digitized a backlog from the early 2010s, she said. "This one had a red flag attached. Your guy's name came up more than once. Thought someone already reviewed it, but it looks like no one ever followed up." Clint frowned. "Red flag?" She nodded. "Witness reports, verbal altercations, some involving a child. They were marked for escalation, but the case was closed with no action taken." Clint's jaw tightened. He signed for the box, thanked her, and carried it out like it was filled with explosives. 2 days later, Carla sat in a soft carpeted room decorated with beanbags, squishy blocks, and a mobile of stars hanging from the ceiling. Eli sat cross-legged on a floor mat, a tiny plastic knight in one hand, a dragon in the other. He was quiet, but engaged, narrating the fight between them in soft, matter-of-fact tones. The play therapist, a gentle woman in her 40s named Dr. Logan, sat beside Carla, watching the boy with professional focus. "He's imaginative," she murmured, "and emotionally sophisticated for his age." Carla smiled faintly. "He's always been observant, even as a baby." Dr. Logan nodded, still watching Eli. "But there's something else," she added. "He's been parentified." Carla blinked. "What do you mean?" Dr. Logan glanced over gently. "It means he's learned to comfort adults, to absorb moods that aren't his responsibility. He's hyper-aware of others' distress and tries to manage it, even before managing his own." Carla's lips parted. "He told the dragon, 'It's okay to cry, but we still have to be brave for Mama.' That's not typical for his age group." Carla's breath caught. She looked at Eli, now letting the knight collapse beside the dragon, as if both were too tired to keep fighting. Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't know he carried that." Dr. Logan touched her shoulder gently. "Most parents don't. Until something breaks." Back at Clint's office, the box sat open across his desk. Loose reports, scanned police statements, 2 handwritten notes from neighbors dated 9 years apart. He flagged one: child present during verbal altercation. Screaming heard. No physical contact observed. Officer advised both parties to separate for the night. No charges filed. And another: caller reports. Something felt off. Screaming. Child hiding behind couch. Father agitated. No follow-up requested by mother. Clint's pulse ticked louder in his ears. He dialed Carla. "Meet me tomorrow," he said. "You're going to want to read this for yourself." Courtroom B smelled like lemon polish and tired fabric. Brian's attorney stood with artificial calm, holding one of the older CPS statements between 2 fingers like it was toxic. "This is hearsay," she said. "Almost a decade old. No charges, no court action, no verification of harm." Clint didn't flinch. "They weren't looking for patterns back then. We are now." "The court shouldn't be in the business of retroactive judgment," she fired back. Clint turned toward the judge. "Then let's talk about the child's current emotional regulation, his withdrawal, his panic responses, His play therapy. He set a photo on the table. Eli's crayon drawing. A stick figure boy standing alone while two larger figures screamed at each other in red X's. The courtroom fell quiet. Even Brian stared at it. The judge leaned forward. "We'll take this under advisement." Outside, Brian stood alone beneath the overhang as rain pattered hard against the concrete. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and pulled out his phone. On screen, a voicemail from Megan, dated nearly a year ago. He hit play. "If anything happens, and I'm not there to explain, just know this isn't sudden. You were never the man you pretended to be." The audio cut off. Brian lowered the phone, his knuckles bone white. And for the first time, he didn't light a second cigarette. Brian sat stiffly at the edge of the polished oak bench, his jaw tight, the cuff of his shirt damp from nervous palms. His eyes darted between the judge and the manila envelope in Julie's hands. He already knew what was in it. Julie stood calmly in front of the bench, the court-provided psychological assessment clipped to her report like a nail to a coffin lid. "Per the court's request," she began, "both guardians underwent psychological screening. Eli participated in developmental and trauma response observation over 3 sessions. The following is a summary of findings." She didn't glance at either party as she spoke. "Mr. Pearson exhibits elevated markers for narcissistic injury, impulse control difficulties, and indicators consistent with subclinical narcissistic rage. While not formally diagnosable under a single DSM classification, patterns of control, emotional invalidation, and enmeshment were present, particularly in how he processes authority and criticism." Brian shifted. His jaw worked silently, but he didn't interrupt. Julie turned a page. Conversely, Ms. Garrison presented as emotionally grounded, resilient under pressure, and attuned to the child's developmental needs. Her responses in stress scenarios remained within healthy adaptive boundaries. She demonstrated no indication of coercive or manipulative behavior. Carla exhaled quietly beside Clint, barely audible. She wore no makeup, just a charcoal gray blouse and jeans. In her lap, her fingers curled around a thin silver chain, her daughter's necklace, looped twice around her palm like rosary beads. Julie continued. "Eli's projective drawings, collected over 3 weeks, consistently depicted home environments with Ms. Garrison, a consistent presence. In 12 drawings, she appears as a central figure. Mr. Pearson does not appear once." She turned to the judge, her voice still even. "It is the opinion of the guardian ad litem that primary placement remain with Ms. Garrison, with continued therapeutic oversight. I further recommend a full custody hearing to evaluate the long-term risks of reunification with Mr. Pearson." The courtroom went still. The judge didn't speak immediately. His eyes lingered on Julie, then dropped to the open file in front of him. Then he looked to Brian. "Mr. Pearson, do you have a response?" Brian stood slowly, controlled, like a man stepping into a minefield. "With respect, Your Honor, psychological tests are opinions, interpretations, not facts." His voice was low and smooth. The same voice that once disarmed people at parties. The one Megan used to believe. "This has been biased from the beginning." Carla's narrative was accepted without question. Julie didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the judge. Brian's attorney rose beside him. "Your Honor, we would ask the court to consider an independent evaluator. This assessment is not court-ordered and it was agreed to by all parties in the last hearing." Clint interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Pearson signed off." The judge held up a hand. "Enough." He turned back to Julie. "Thank you for your thorough report." She nodded and stepped back, clipboard at her side. Clint leaned closer to Carla and whispered, "Watch his hands." Carla didn't ask why. She already knew. Across the room, Brian's fingers curled into fists again, subtle, but not invisible. Clint smiled faintly, more pity than triumph. The judge rose from the bench. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. In the meantime, current orders remain in place. No unsupervised contact with the child. Psychological reassessments may be scheduled at the court's discretion. We are adjourned. The gavel struck once. Brian didn't move. Carla stood slowly, slipping her daughter's necklace back beneath her collar. She turned to leave without a glance back. Brian watched her go. His lips barely moved, but the words were there. This isn't over. Outside, as Carla stepped into the light of day, her phone buzzed. A block number. She answered. No voice. Just a low hum. And then, a single line of whispered audio. Familiar. Slurred. Slow. You think you've won, but I still have what matters. Then silence. Carla lowered the phone. Her grip tightened. The judge's chambers were smaller than the courtroom, but colder somehow. Dim light, gray carpet, too many file folders stacked along the edges like forgotten verdicts. Eli sat in the oversized chair opposite the desk, legs dangling, shoes barely grazing the floor. His hands fidgeted in his lap. Not afraid, just unsure. Judge Ryder folded his hands. I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions, okay? Eli nodded. I just want to know one thing, the judge said, his voice quiet and even. Where do you feel safe? Eli looked down at his shoes. One lace was untied. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Not heavy, but honest. Then, without lifting his head, he whispered, with Nana. Always Nana. The judge leaned back, tapping one slow finger on the edge of the desk. Thank you, son, he said. You did just fine. Julie sat alone in the hallway, typing into her tablet. When the door opened, she stood. Judge Ryder stepped past her with a slow, unreadable nod. She didn't follow him immediately. She just looked through the glass at the little boy now quietly braiding his own shoelaces. One loop knotted 3 times. In court, the seats were filled this time. Attorneys, stenographer, even 2 reporters from the local paper. The gallery buzzed with a kind of restless anticipation. Julie stood again, the final guardian summary in her hands. Following repeated evaluations, interviews, collateral testimony, and therapeutic observations, she said, it's my position that the child, Eli Pearson, should remain in the care of Carla Garrison. She turned one page. During a direct conversation with the court, when asked where he felt safe, Eli replied, with Nana. Always Nana. Brian's voice cut through the air, sharp. He's a child. He doesn't know what's best for him. Julie didn't react, but the judge raised a single finger. That's enough, Mr. Pearson. Brian's attorney placed a hand on his arm, whispering something too soft to catch. Julie continued. His environment with Ms. Garrison has demonstrated consistency, emotional regulation, and appropriate boundaries. There is no indication of neglect, instability, or psychological harm under her care. She sat down. The room stayed quiet. Clint rose next, a folder in hand. He clicked open a binder and placed it gently on the table before the judge. In addition to the Guardian's report, we're submitting Ms. Garrison's financial disclosures, all verified. Her mortgage is current. She maintains a steady income as a nurse practitioner. Eli is enrolled in school, therapy, and extracurriculars. He turned a page. She has 3 community letters of support, including one from the child's therapist. Then he looked across the aisle. Calm, measured. We would argue that stability is not just about biological ties. It's about the structure around a child. And Brian Pearson offers no such structure. Brian's attorney cleared her throat, rising reluctantly. My client is a freelance contractor in the process of securing permanent employment. There have been delays due to external circumstances, but he is making progress. The judge arched one brow. And his current housing? She hesitated. Month-to-month lease. He's facing potential eviction due to back rent, but we believe that'll do, the judge said, not unkindly. He closed the folder gently, almost ceremonially. Carla hadn't said a word the entire time. She sat steady, back straight, hands folded. The silver chain around her neck caught the light as she inhaled slowly, quietly. The courtroom seemed to lean toward her, as if the truth had finally settled into place, and everyone was waiting to see if she would crumble or stand. She did neither. She just breathed. Outside, Brian paced the courthouse steps, a storm building behind his eyes. He checked his phone again. No new messages. Then he opened the Notes app, typed 4 words. She turned him against me. He hit save, then opened a second note, and began typing something longer. Carla was folding laundry when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered. A woman's voice. Hesitant, young, but certain. Hi. My name's Taylor Nichols. I used to work with Megan at the pharmacy. She talked about you all the time. Carla's knees softened. She sank to the edge of the couch. She used to say you were the only person she ever felt safe around. There was a pause. I know I should have come forward sooner, but I didn't think it mattered. And then I saw your name in the local paper. Carla swallowed. Why are you calling? Taylor didn't miss a beat. Because Megan was scared. Really scared. She had a go bag in her trunk. With clothes. Cash. Her birth certificate. She told me once, if I vanish, it wasn't random. Silence stretched between them. I want to testify, Taylor said. If it helps the boy, I'll say everything I remember. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had gotten around. Brian sat in the defendant's chair, arms crossed, jaw locked. He hadn't looked at Carla once. Taylor Nichols was young, mid-20s, with clear eyes and a voice steadier than anyone expected. She stood at the witness stand, palms pressed to the wood like she was holding something up. I worked with Megan for almost 3 years, she said. We weren't best friends, but we got close. Lunch breaks, texts, the usual. Clint nodded. Tell us about what you observed. Taylor inhaled. Megan never said anything directly. Not at first. But over time, she started changing. She checked the windows before leaving work. She never parked in the same spot twice. Once, she asked me if bruises on the forearm could be just from stress. She glanced at Brian, then away quickly. Eventually, she told me she had a bag in her trunk. Just in case. She said Brian didn't hit her, not exactly, but that he'd get in her head, twist things, slam cabinets, break her favorite things and say it was an accident. Taylor's voice dropped to a whisper. She said she wanted out, but she didn't want to lose Eli. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Clint stepped forward. Thank you, Ms. Nichols. No further questions. Brian's attorney stood, hesitant. Ms. Nichols, you say Megan never reported any of this? No, but she didn't trust the system. Said if she went to court he'd win, because he always looked so normal. Brian flinched. Julie stood next. We've reviewed Megan's OB records, she said, facing the judge. Stress-related symptoms were documented during her 3rd trimester. Sleep disruption, elevated blood pressure. There was a notation. Patient expressed feeling trapped at home. She paused. It aligns with Taylor Nichols' timeline, and with early testimony from neighbors. Julie's voice was calm but razor-edged. It's not just history anymore, it's a pattern. Brian's face was red now. Damp. His collar was open. And his lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear, but he shook his head violently. The judge looked down at his notes. Carla didn't shift in her seat. Didn't fidget. She sat still, hands folded, her daughter's necklace peeking from beneath the collar of her navy blue blouse. She didn't blink as Taylor left the stand, because she already knew all of it. She'd lived beside it for years, watching her sister shrink in ways no one could see unless they were really looking. And now it was out there. No longer protectable, no longer ignorable. Later that afternoon, Carla sat beside Eli in the garden. It had rained earlier. The soil was soft. They dug together with plastic trowels, pulling weeds and patting down roots. "Why do plants need space?" Eli asked, brushing dirt off a tulip bulb. "So they don't get choked," Carla said, brushing his hair back. "They grow best when they can breathe." He nodded, thoughtful. Then he pulled out his sketchbook from under the porch swing. He opened to a fresh page and began to draw. A small house, a garden, 2 stick figures holding shovels beneath a bright blue sky. He handed it to her. "That's you. That's me." She smiled, a tear catching in her lashes. "Can we stay like this?" he asked. Carla didn't answer right away. Because she knew they weren't done. Not yet. Inside Brian's truck, the second note sat unfinished, but a third had begun. This one had a title: "Custody Plan, Full Custody or Else." And beneath it, scratched in crooked lines, "She doesn't get to erase me." The trooper tapped twice on the window. Brian cracked it an inch. "What's the problem, officer?" "Routine checkpoint," the trooper said, flashing a polite smile. "License and registration, please." Brian handed them over, cool and casual. A second trooper approached the passenger side where Eli sat, quiet, wide-eyed, strapped in with a coloring book across his lap. "You folks traveling far?" the first officer asked. "Just heading upstate," Brian said. "Family visit." The officer nodded slowly, glancing at the back seat. "Mind popping the trunk?" Brian hesitated. "Is that necessary?" Now the smile faded. "Yes, sir." "It is." The duffel bag was tucked beneath a spare tire. Inside, a change of clothes for Eli, snack bars, $2,300 in cash, prepaid phone cards, a burner flip phone still in its box, and 2 fake birth certificates. One listed Eli as Eli Jonathan Parker, born in Arkansas. The other listed Brian as his sole legal guardian. By the time they got the cuffs on, Brian was red-faced and sputtering, insisting he had every right to take his son where he pleased, that this was all a misunderstanding, that no one had the full story. But the officers weren't listening anymore. They read him his rights in the breakdown lane, sirens off. The sunrise bleeding across the horizon behind them. Carla's phone rang at 6:12 a.m. She blinked against the dim morning light and answered with a rasped, "Hello? This is Deputy Alvarez with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. We need to inform you that Brian Pearson has been detained for attempted custodial interference. Your nephew is safe." Carla sat up. "Eli." "He's fine, ma'am. He's with Child Protective Services in Westlake. They'll wait for your arrival." The phone slipped slightly in Carla's hand as she turned toward the sleeping form beside her. Eli's fingers were curled around the edge of the blanket. She pulled him closer and kissed the top of his head. "I've got you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. By mid-morning, Clint was already filing paperwork. "A full restraining order," he said, tapping keys. "Permanent if the court grants it." This crossed every line. He glanced up at Carla, who sat with a thermal mug in one hand, face unreadable. "He didn't just violate a custody order," Clint added. "He falsified documents and tried to take Eli across state lines." Carla stared out the office window. He would have done it. Clint didn't answer that, because they both knew. Julie's final addendum came 2 hours later. "Following the subject's unlawful attempt to relocate the child without consent, I'm formally requesting the court bar any future unsupervised visitation and issue a standing protection order. In addition to previous findings, this act confirms the child has been emotionally manipulated. He views his guardian, Ms. Garrison, as his primary emotional safe zone. This pattern is now medically and legally urgent. She hit send and closed the file. That evening, Carla and Eli sat in the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and puzzles and sun-warmed air. They hadn't turned the TV on. No music played. Just the low buzz of the ceiling fan and the comforting rustle of normal. Eli was drawing again. This time, a house with a chimney, a dog in the yard, two people in a hammock under the sun. Carla leaned over. "Who's in the hammock?" "That's me and you." He colored in a red blanket over their stick-figure legs. "Can I ask you something?" she said gently. Eli looked up. "If you ever wanted something different, if you ever wanted to live somewhere else or see your dad more, I'd want you to tell me, even if it's hard." Eli thought about that, then shook his head. "I want to stay." His voice didn't tremble. He didn't glance away. "I feel like I can be little again here, and not scared." Carla's breath hitched, just for a second. She nodded. "Then you'll stay." In the county jail, Brian stared through bulletproof glass. His public defender sat across from him, stone-faced. "You're lucky you didn't cross state lines. If you had, we'd be talking federal charges." Brian leaned forward. "I need to see him." "You won't." Brian's voice dropped to a growl. "I'm his father." The attorney didn't blink. "And now the whole system knows exactly what kind of father you are." The courtroom was standing room only. A dozen reporters lined the back wall, notepads in hand, cameras slung low out of respect, but ready. Local news vans had been parked outside since dawn. People recognized the name now, not from fame, but from consequence. Brian Pearson, custodial interference, fake documents, protection orders, a child too afraid to speak his father's name without flinching. He entered in a navy suit that didn't quite fit. Hair slicked back too tightly. Under his arm, a manila folder, thick and ragged with handwritten notes. He didn't look at anyone. Not the judge, not the crowd, especially not Carla. His attorney wasn't seated yet. Clint was. Carla beside him, calm, composed. Both hands resting on her lap, the chain with her daughter's locket nestled against her sternum like armor. The judge entered. "All rise." Clint approached the front like he'd done this 1,000 times, but this time was different. He opened a binder, clicked it gently. "Your Honor, today we lay out not just the violations of custody law, not just the timeline of parental misconduct, but the entire story of harm. Consistent, deliberate, and paper-trailed over the course of years." He turned to the gallery. "We begin with the CPS reports, spanning a decade. We continue through Megan Garrison's OB notes, coworker testimony, neighborhood complaints, and the verified psychological findings on both guardian parties." He paused. Let the weight settle. "And we end with Eli's own words, spoken to the court. Spoken without coaching, without narrative, just truth." He lifted a sheet and read, "I want to stay with Nana because I feel safe, not like before. Before, I thought if I messed up, everything would break." Clint looked up. "The system failed Megan. We ask that it not fail her son." Brian stood. "My client believes." The voice came from behind him. "I'm done." Heads turned. His attorney, the third he'd retained, stood just past the railing, briefcase in hand. She wasn't looking at Brian. She was looking at the judge. "I respectfully withdraw from representation." Brian turned slowly, blinking. "What?" "I was not made aware of the full timeline until last night. After reviewing the custody interference charges and the mental health file, I can no longer in good conscience represent Mr. Pearson." "Objection!" Brian barked, though no one was speaking. His voice cracked. "This is parental bias. You're letting that woman—" The judge slammed his gavel. "Mr. Pearson, enough." The gallery held its breath. The judge continued. "This is not bias. This is consequence. You are not the victim here." Brian sat, slowly, as if lowering himself into something that might collapse. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. A light breeze brushed through the courthouse courtyard where Carla and Eli stood beneath a tree. He held her hand tightly, his little backpack still on from school. He wore his favorite sneakers, the ones with worn-out Velcro and scribbles on the toes. "Are we winning?" he asked, not looking up. Carla looked down at him, searching his face. "We're standing," she said. "That's enough." Eli nodded, quiet, then wrapped his arms around her waist. Not out of fear, but finality. Like a chapter closing. Julie watched from across the walkway. She didn't approach, but she wrote something in her notes. Child exhibits emotional stability in primary guardian's presence, shows understanding of court process, demonstrates secure attachment, trauma symptoms decreasing. She underlined the last line twice. Inside the now silent courtroom, Brian sat alone at the table. His hands trembled beneath the folder as he flipped pages back and forth, trying to find something that still mattered. A picture of Megan, creased and coffee-stained, slid out from the bottom stack. He stared at it. She was laughing in the photo. Wind in her hair, Eli on her hip. He scratched at the corner of the picture like he could remove her from it. But she stayed there, smiling, without him. The judge didn't look up right away. He sat motionless, glasses low on his nose, a thick folder open before him. The room was silent, not tense, but expectant, like a breath being held in every chest. Carla didn't move. Neither did Brian. Eli sat quietly beside Carla, legs swinging beneath the long wooden bench. His small hand was wrapped inside hers, thumb tracing the edge of her palm like a memory he didn't want to forget. Finally, Judge Ryder closed the file. He looked first at Eli. Not at the attorneys, not at the gallery, just the boy. Then he spoke. "This court finds that continued contact with Brian Pearson poses a credible emotional and psychological risk to the child, Eli Pearson." Brian's body twitched slightly, but he didn't interrupt this time. He just stared forward, hollow-eyed. The judge continued. "In accordance with Florida family law and after thorough review of documented evidence, testimony, evaluations, and criminal charges currently pending against Mr. Pearson, I am awarding full legal and physical custody to Ms. Carla Garrison." The words didn't echo. They just landed. A weight hitting the floor. No whispers, no gasps. Not yet. The judge kept going. "There will be no visitation rights granted at this time. The defendant is barred from initiating any contact, physical, digital, or indirect, for a period of no less than 5 years, at which time a psychological reassessment and risk evaluation will be required before any future proceedings." He paused, not for drama, but for precision. "This is not punishment. This is protection." He looked up. "For a child who deserves peace." The gallery didn't move. Even the pen stopped scratching. Even the reporters didn't blink. Just stunned stillness. Carla didn't cry, didn't collapse. She just exhaled, deeply, fully, like she hadn't in months. Eli looked up at her. "We're going home now?" She smiled softly. "Yes, baby, we are." He tightened his grip around her fingers and didn't let go. Across the aisle, Brian's jaw flexed. His eyes flicked toward Carla, then to Eli, then away. He opened his mouth. Closed it. The man who'd shouted, manipulated, twisted systems and stories for years, now had nothing left to say. No lawyer, no son, no audience. Just consequences. Outside the courthouse, the sun had crept higher. The sidewalk shimmered. Carla walked slowly down the steps with Eli's hand still locked in hers. Reporters watching from behind rope lines. No one shouted questions. No one intruded. Because the story was already written, Julie caught up behind them, clipboard under one arm. "You did it," Carla said, barely above a whisper. Julie shook her head. "You did." She looked down at Eli, then back at Carla. Justice didn't need noise, just truth. Carla nodded. Julie smiled faintly. "And a really good attorney." Clint joined them a moment later, loosening his tie. "We'll get a clean certified copy of the ruling in hand tomorrow. But as of this moment," he motioned toward Eli, "he's home for good." Eli tilted his head up at Clint. "Does that mean I don't have to leave anymore?" Clint knelt so they were eye level. "That's exactly what it means." Inside the courtroom, Judge Ryder returned to his chambers alone. He hung his robe, sat at his desk, pressed his fingers into his temples. On the edge of his desk sat a sticky note, the one he'd scribbled after Eli's private interview weeks earlier. Just 4 words. "With Nana. Always Nana." He looked at it for a long moment, then finally peeled it off, folded it in half, and placed it inside the case file. It was Eli who found the journal. They were cleaning out Megan's old nightstand together, part of Carla's quiet effort to let her grandson decide what stayed, what could go. Eli pulled it from the bottom drawer, beneath a mess of rubber bands, dried pens, and faded grocery receipts. The leather was cracked around the edges, the spine soft from years of use. He handed it to Carla without a word, sensing its weight had nothing to do with the pages inside. She opened it slowly. Inside the front cover, tucked neatly under the flap, was an envelope. Her name written on the outside. "Mom, if something happens." Carla's breath stopped. Not hitched. Stopped. She didn't open it right away. She just held it against her chest and let the world pause around her. Eli watched her for a moment, then quietly excused himself, the way children do when they understand something too big is unfolding, and they need to make space for it. Carla sat on the floor of her daughter's old room. She opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet, handwritten in Megan's familiar, slightly left-leaning script, dated 1.5 years before she died. "If anything happens to me, don't let him take Eli. Please, don't let the court pretend they don't already know who he is. Let Eli stay with Mom. She's the only one who truly knows him. Not the version he shows strangers. The real him. The silly one. The sensitive one. The one who cries when he breaks a crayon. I know this won't matter in court, but maybe it will matter to someone. I'm scared, but I'm planning. I haven't given up. I'm still trying. But if I vanish, if I fade the way people do, let Eli grow where it's safe to bloom." Monsieur Carla didn't sob. She broke. The grief, so long buried under hearings and motions and trauma management, came up and out all at once, her hand clutching the paper like it might disappear if she let go. She cried for the first time in months. Not quietly, not carefully, fully. She cried like the woman who'd raised Megan. And the woman, now raising her son. And the woman who finally had her daughter's words in her hands. The letter was notarized, folded into the back pages of Megan's journal, sealed with a small sticker the way she used to mark holiday cards. Clint read it the next day, standing by the window in his office with a coffee gone cold. Then, without a word, he added it to the case file and walked it across the street to the courthouse. "Supplemental documentation," he told the clerk. "Not legally binding, but emotionally damning." The clerk nodded. "I'll add it to the record." Julie read the letter 3 times before speaking to anyone. Then she started drafting a proposal, reforms for how domestic concern letters are handled in family court. She scheduled meetings with 2 judges and 1 state rep. Her report opened with one quote, She's the only one who truly knows him. And below it, proactive isn't enough. Protection must start before loss. Brian filed an appeal. He tried to claim procedural error, bias, emotional prejudice. The appellate judge read the summary, reviewed the charges, and denied the motion in under 4 hours. No hearing, no reconsideration. The decision was final. Brian didn't cry, but when the letter was entered into the court record, notarized, time-stamped, handwritten in ink, he stared at the line about the crayons for a long time. And for the first time since his arrest, he asked for paper. Not to draft another appeal, but to write his own letter. To Eli. No one knows what it said. He sealed it, and never mailed it. That night, Carla placed Megan's journal on the highest shelf of the hallway bookcase. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept. Eli watched her from the couch, a blanket pulled to his chin. Was it sad? He asked. Carla turned. It was love, she said softly. Love that tried. Love that stayed. Eli nodded. That's what I feel now. She sat beside him and pulled the blanket up over both their shoulders. They didn't speak again, because they didn't need to. The building wasn't much. A renovated community hall on the edge of town, fresh paint over old brick. The sign out front read in hand-lettered blue, Riverlight Family Resource Center. Below it, smaller, support, shelter, second chances. Carla stood in the doorway on her first day as a volunteer, watching a young mom in a stained hoodie fill out an intake form with one hand while rocking a toddler with the other. A staffer offered Carla a clipboard. She took it, smiled. The kind that meant I remember what it feels like to walk in here unsure if you'll be heard. Because now she did. Eli's newest drawing hung on the fridge, 4 magnets holding it in place like it might blow away. He'd used every color. Sky blues, sun yellows, a swing set, a house with crooked shingles. There was a dog wearing sunglasses and a mailbox shaped like a dinosaur. Carla hadn't commented on the detail, but she stared at the figure on the porch, a woman in jeans and a red shirt, watering flowers. In his last 12 pictures, that woman was always smiling. This was the first where she had both eyes open. It took them 2 years to return to the canyon. Eli had grown taller, steadier. Carla had more gray in her hair. But the landscape, sharp sun, crimson rock, scrub brush clinging to cliff sides, hadn't changed at all. They parked at the overlook, boots crunching gravel as they stepped to the edge. This is where she used to come? Eli asked. Carla nodded, hand tightening around the urn in her backpack. She said the wind always fell honest here, like it didn't know how to lie. They walked in silence for an hour, then another. At a bend in the trail where desert sunflowers grew wild against the rock face, Carla stopped. She opened the urn. The wind didn't pause. It just carried. Eli didn't speak. He just held her hand. Together, they scattered the last handful of Megan's ashes into a place that felt like her. Open, stubborn, wild, and real. The plaque had been installed weeks earlier. Carla hadn't seen it finished yet. Julie had handled the city permits, the engraving, the mounting. It stood on a simple granite slab beside the canyon trail, 3 feet tall, grounded in stone. Carla knelt to read it aloud. For mothers who never quit. For the ones who tried, even when no one believed them. For the ones who fought through silence. For the ones who left behind something stronger than fear. Carla ran her fingers across Megan's name etched at the base, then stepped back. Not to leave, to let others step forward. Tasha showed up 3 weeks later, kids in tow, a girl in pigtails, a toddler with sticky fingers and wide eyes. Carla met them at the community center, wiping down a toy bin when the door chimed. Hey, Tasha said, lifting a hand. Figured it was time? The two women hugged, tighter than either expected. Tasha looked around. You built all this? Carla shook her head. No, just helped clear space. Tasha nodded. Her voice was soft, but steady. Well, you changed everything, whether you meant to or not. Carla blinked. That wasn't the plan. Tasha smiled. Doesn't have to be. It still counts. Later that night, Carla lit a candle in the kitchen window. A quiet ritual. No words. Just light held steady in the dark. Eli padded in from his room. I want to make a book, he said. Carla turned. A book? About us, he said. And her. Not like court stuff. Just how we stayed. Carla blinked. The words caught her unexpectedly. Think anyone would read it? Eli shrugged. Doesn't matter. I'll read it. He looked up. So I don't forget what it took. She crossed the room, kissed his forehead. Then let's start writing it. Somewhere across the state, Brian flipped through channels in a halfway house wreck room. The news was on mute. A scroll across the bottom read, Local mother honored with memorial plaque for advocacy in domestic safety reform. He turned off the TV, went outside. And for the first time in a long time, he said nothing at all. The room wasn't a courtroom. Not this time. Just a state legislative hearing chamber with rows of microphones and polished wood. A flag in the corner. Folded nameplates on the dais. Carla adjusted her blazer. Not new, just clean. Her locket glinted beneath the collar, the same way it had the day everything changed. A senator leaned into his mic. Ms. Garrison, you don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with. Carla smiled faintly. That's the first thing nobody said to my daughter. She took a breath and told the story of Megan, of Eli, of nights spent pacing with fear too big for one person to carry, and mornings spent packing school lunches anyway. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. But halfway through, one of the aides passed her a tissue anyway, and another mom in the second row reached for her hand. 3 weeks later, the judge's ruling came through. Final adoption, permanent custody. Carla was no longer guardian, she was mom. They didn't go to a courthouse for the paperwork. Clint handled it in his office, tucked between two high bookshelves and a clock that had never quite ticked right. Eli stood beside Carla, holding her hand like he had in so many rooms before. But this time, when he signed his name beneath the adoption decree, he looked up at her and said, Now I'm yours forever, right? Carla cupped his cheek. You've always been mine. The backyard dinner was Carla's idea. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, paper lanterns, pie on mismatched plates. Tasha brought lemonade. Clint brought store-bought potato salad and claimed he made it. No one believed him. Eli helped string the lights along the fence. Julie arrived late, her arms full of dahlias and sunflowers and a sealed envelope. This came from Judge Ryder, she said, handing it to Carla. Inside, a single handwritten card. Justice was served, and so was love. Thank you for reminding the system why it matters. Below it, a postscript. P.S. Eli's drawing still hangs in my office. Carla folded the note and placed it beside the guest book. Eli was barefoot by then, chasing fireflies. Julie watched him and smiled. You ever think this day would come? Carla shook her head. No. Then, but I never stopped building toward it. Later, after the last dish was washed and the porch light dimmed, Carla found herself standing at Eli's bedroom door. He'd fallen asleep sideways, one foot dangling off the bed, a crayon still in his hand. The new book, their book, sat open on his nightstand. Page 1 featured a house, a tree, and two stick figures standing side by side. One had gray streaks in her hair, the other had a cape. Carla gently pulled the blanket over his shoulders. As she turned to leave, his voice drifted up. Mom would be proud. Carla's breath caught. She turned back. She is. Eli blinked, smiled sleepily, and was out again before she reached the door. She stood at the window for a while. The candle was lit again. The same one as before. Same soft glow. Outside, the street was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came from fear, but from enough. Somewhere miles away, Brian sat in a transitional housing dormitory, flipping through a stack of old letters he never sent. He'd written dozens to Eli, none mailed, none read. Just words he hadn't earned the right to speak. A staff worker paused beside him. You writing another one? Brian stared at the blank page, then quietly folded it. No, he said. Not this time. Back in the house, Carla poured herself a cup of tea. The kitchen was still, humming faintly with the sound of the fridge and the ticking wall clock. She picked up the pen from the counter and opened the book Eli had started. A fresh page. She wrote, "He chose me when the world fell apart, and I chose him for everything that came after."